Thank you very much, and I'm very honored to be here and to speak amongst such other keynote speakers also. So thank you. So I would like to talk about a more, perhaps a more practical perspective, which of course is within this framework of governance of working life. So I talk about AI and work. So the summary of my talk is AI is rapidly evolving and being increasingly used, and AI can be used to automate work tasks. It can be used to augment or complement workers. It can also do stuff that humans can't do or can't do easily. So far, it seems like AI has had a rather small impact on overall employment levels. But anecdotally, we see evidence and we hear in the news almost every day about headlines about job cuts related that are said to be related to AI. When it comes to stress and inequality, the evidence so far is rather mixed. Yes, so I'll start with AI development and use, and we've heard some introduction here by the previous speakers, Kalle, about the development of AI and AI hype or AI summers and AI winters. So I just want to, hadn't seen his slides before, so I'll say something also on this. So there's been, I'm not an AI expert, so I'm an economist. But to my understanding, there's been a quite a substantial increase in the power of machine learning systems since the 50s, and it's in particular in the last 10, 20 years. And it's said by researchers in the field that the capacity or the number of computations that machine learning systems can do doubles every second year or even faster. When it comes to large language models, on the vertical axis here we see how difficult problems that large language models can solve. And on the horizontal axis, we have the cost per million tokens in training these systems. And here it's in inverted scale, so from at the origo from the most expensive to less expensive. And according to at least this figure here, we see that these systems, large language models, are increasingly capable of solving problems that are quite advanced, actually. Meanwhile, the cost of training these systems is decreasing. So what about AI use? So a quarter is a good number. So a quarter of Swedes say that they used generative AI in the last 3 months, according to the most recent data from Statistics Sweden. Of course, this changes by the day. A quarter of Americans say that they used Gen AI in the last week, according to a study published this year. And about a quarter of firms in Sweden and in the Nordic countries say that they are using AI. And these are surveys among firms with at least 10 employees. And there's been a quite a substantial increase from 11% in 2023 for Sweden to 25% in 2024. And about half of white-collar workers, according to a recent survey by the trade union Akavia, which organizes white-collar workers in Sweden, about half of them say that they used used AI the last week, probably Gen AI. Another way to try to look at the adoption of AI is to look at job ads. So that's increasingly used as a source of data for economic research. And both in the private sector and in the public sector, there has been an exponential increase in the share of job ads that are related to AI by AI skills being required in these job ads. So the blue line here is for the national level, so statliga myndigheter, public authorities at the national level, and would see a similar figure for private firms. For municipalities and at the regional level, even though it doesn't seem to be much of an increase, there is actually an increase because of, but it's outsized by what's happening at the national level. So this also indicates that since 2015-16, there's been a quite rapid increase in the use of AI, or requirements of having AI skills. So what do people use AI for? So there was a study done by Statskontoret, it's a government agency, about how do national authorities use AI. And they use it for translation, they use it for supporting decision making, for screening different types of images, for masking sensitive information before you hand out documents that someone in the public requires. And by and large, those who were interviewed by this government agency, the workers seemed to be positive, that it was helpful in their work situation. Okay, so now we know a bit about AI development and use, and now I would like to talk about AI in work before entering into talking about AI in stress and AI in inequality. So conceptually, before we look at the empirical research so far, what do you know about AI in work, or how could we think about this? Well, basically, we can think of what AI can do as within this rectangular box. So this is just an illustration, so nothing about the magnitudes here. So we can think that there are some things that AI can do for us humans within this rectangular box. There are some things that we humans can do that AI can't do, but then the black circle here, there are things that AI can do that also humans can do. So how would this play out in the labor market? Before I say that, I want to connect to something that the previous speaker talked about. So although AI is capable and can do certain things that are very difficult or maybe even impossible for us humans to do, AI has its weak spots. And I want to emphasize also, in line with the previous speaker, to emphasize that AI, for instance, has a weak spot when it comes to complex and non-routine tasks, especially if the events or if the tasks that we are about to try to solve at work, if they are rare, so, or if it's new tasks where or new cases where we don't have much training data. Also, if we have decisions about life and death, maybe the system could execute this task, but maybe we don't want it to because we want to be in control, and should, I would say, be in control. AI doesn't have common sense by itself. It doesn't have any moral. It also has difficulties to explain what's happening. So, of course, in the medical field, in hospitals, AI used a lot, using machine learning for understanding, for instance, X-ray images. But certain things that are done in hospitals would require, I would say, some kind of explainability and common sense, and humans involved. AI also has problems with physical tasks, work tasks, if we don't have a robot combining AI and robotics or robots. AI is not very good at social interaction. So there are, of course, limitations to what AI can do, and also where it's sensible to deploy AI. So how would this affect jobs? How can AI impact jobs? Well, what we commonly see in the newspapers is about displacement. So AI will take jobs. AI will firms cut their or say that they will cut their staff by half, like Klarna did, the Swedish company, and they refer it to AI because AI can automate, make things more efficient. And that will be a minus on the job side. So there will be fewer jobs, everything else equal. But then, of course, AI can also complement workers, so make workers more effective, so they can produce more and also maybe with higher quality. And also AI can also make an organization more productive depending on the costs of implementing the AI algorithms and rescheduling how things are done, and depending on how costly these investments are. If the cost is not that high and if the labor productivity effects of automation and complementation are substantial, this may actually lead to more jobs. And then finally, with new technology, we have new types of tasks. So before we had wind power, we didn't have specialist workers working with planning and implementing wind power, likewise with electricity and engineers. And of course also with AI, we expect and we see also some new job titles that we didn't have before. So we expect that there will be a reinstatement of workers, but in new and often more complex tasks. So these are our expectations. Of course, there are some other effects. I won't go into them now, but that also affect this equation. But all these kind of mechanisms are affecting to what it boils down to, what happens to the number of jobs or to wages. I think it's often true that we kind of overestimate the capacity of AI today or a new technology today and its effects, and we maybe underestimate it in the long run. So I did think that's something to keep in mind. And one reason why we kind of overestimate the impact today is that we see some examples where AI is very powerful and can help to increase efficiency, but at the same time it takes a lot of investment before in an organization or a country before things have been rearranged and you really have seen how to deploy the technology and then to boost productivity in that organization. So at our lab, we try to work together with computer scientists and also to also try to understand, what of course here, what can AI do? So looking at the research literature on what AI can do, and then combining that with data on what workers do in their work and what abilities are required at work in different occupations, we have created 11 indices or indices for AI occupational exposure. And then we link this with microdata for Sweden, where we know where workers are, what kind of occupation workers have. And then we show here in different industries how big a share of employment that is highly exposed or medium exposed or low exposed to what AI could do. This does not mean that, so if an occupation is highly exposed, that doesn't mean that AI could automate that job. It only means that AI can be useful either for automating or complementing workers in that specific occupation. So overall, we see that in most of industries, this is in the Swedish case, in most industries, more than half, or at least half of the employees in their work, AI is highly useful or medium useful. And overall, about 70% of Swedish workers work in occupations where AI is highly useful or medium useful. If we then look at do another kind of cut here. We look at different occupational groups. We see that there is quite a big difference between very manual or less qualified work and the more advanced work. So typically white-collar workers are more exposed to AI, and that's very sensible because AI can do things that are cognitive and also and routine, but also non-cognitive routine work. So far, the empirical evidence on AI's labor market impacts point to very small, as I said in the beginning, small effects on aggregate employment, fairly small effects at firms in general, even though we see cases, of course, anecdotal evidence contrary to that. There seems to be a tendency that those who are most positively affected by AI, both AI, predictive AI and generative AI, they are the more qualified workers. Thirdly, there are productivity gains. So this connects to the conceptual framework I showed earlier. There are productivity gains from using AI, both in experiments or primarily in experiments. I'll come back to that. And then we have quite little evidence on displacement and new types of occupations. And this is perhaps a worry of some of the economists that do research in this field. Will the new occupations or tasks arrive as fast as the old ones disappear? And what's perhaps I wouldn't say alarming, but what makes it important to monitor this, I think, is that perhaps this AI is a general purpose technology that can be used in many places in the economy and also be beneficial for economic growth and welfare in the longer run. But maybe this transformation, the structural transformation, takes place so fast that it's or will take place so fast that it may cause disruption that can be quite substantial. So this is something that some researchers flag for. So here's just an example of the experiments that have taken place. So this is not a randomized controlled trial, although there are a bunch of such studies, but the tendency is similar. So here they randomly assigned people working in customer service in a software company in the US, I think, and then after at a certain point in time zero here, some of them were randomly assigned to be allowed to use Gen AI in work. And then we see that comparing those who were allowed to use Gen AI with those who were not allowed to use it, the ones who use Gen AI, their productivity increases by 15 to 30%. And especially the junior workers seem to benefit the most. So this is a typical pattern in several studies. So now I'd like to go into, how are we with time? Yes, thank you. So now I'd like to go into two areas to talk about AI and stress and AI and inequality. And right out, I want to say we know very little so far. So this will be, tentative evidence, and there needs to be much more research on this. So conceptually, we can researchers typically talk about demands and latitude or autonomy and support as factors affecting how workers or humans fare in terms of stress levels. So if we have a lot of demands on ourselves and we have little latitude or autonomy and little support, we will get stressed. We will tend to get stressed. I think this is something we can all relate to. And what can happen in the workplace if AI is introduced? Well, here are some different channels that we could conceive how AI could impact our stress levels. So it could change the content. AI can change the content of our work and the intensity of our work. So maybe if AI can automate certain tasks, maybe we will have fewer tasks. and which tasks that are, constitute our work is changing. So that's, I think, is I don't think that overall we need, at least for the medium term, to worry so much about many jobs disappearing. But I think that what we do at work is changing and will change the content of work. And so which task we carry out and which skill requirements are, which skills are required. And this may affect stress. The duration of work may change. How AI could also affect how things are managed at work, and there is talk about algorithms as bosses, algorithmic management, um, and that may, for instance, could potentially, depending on how we deploy it, decrease autonomy, which then would increase stress. There is also talk, before we had generative AI and people thought about AI, there is research about techno stress, that workers can feel stressed when there is new technology introduced at work and they feel that they don't know about it or understand how to use it, and maybe it's not tailored to their needs. My wife is a medical doctor, and I know from her field that it can cause quite a lot of stress, and it's quite well documented, depending on how it's implemented. Also, how AI could also affect how we collaborate with colleagues, and of course how AI systems work and how they are introduced and implemented can affect stress levels. So, according to a report by Kayander and others a couple of years back, they emphasized that for a new technology like AI to reduce stress, or at least not increase stress, it's important that workers are in charge of the tools. Also that there is support in using the tools and appropriate training, and that there is ethical considerations made about who is responsible, the human or those who provide the technical tool. What happens if something goes wrong, and also that the workers feel safe with AI and how it is used. So far, unfortunately, we don't know very much about how this is playing out beyond anecdotal evidence. There are some case studies that suggest actually both positive and negative impacts of AI on the stress level of workers. There is asking white collar workers. Akavia asked 2 years back about what workers thought of AI then, and white collar workers were positive to AI generally, but uncertain about their impacts. There is a Japanese survey that I think is interesting that showed that when AI was introduced in a workplace, workers felt that they were more satisfied with work, but at the same time they were more stressed. So because AI could automate things that were tedious or boring or not very stimulating, and then what remained was the more demanding or stimulating work. But that then they had to be on their toes all the time, so that caused stress. And also OECD has written about this, and then they mentioned some company where they said we could automate more things in our company than we do, but we keep some easier tasks because otherwise you never can have if you're in customer service, the only customers you meet are the ones with super tricky cases, then you can never just go on autopilot and just think about being nice and solve things that you have solved many times before. You always have to be on your toes, and that can be stressful. So this company chose to keep also some things that could actually be automated. Together with Michael Koch at Aarhus University, we did a study that was published last year, As with evidence in this area, this is far from the ideal causal evidence, but at least it may provide some indication of the relationship between AI exposure and workers' stress levels. So we combined large-scale survey data from 40,000 workers that were interviewed extensively. This is a recurring survey in 2012 and 2018. And then we combined that with occupational measures of AI and robot exposure, and then we tried to link this exposure to stress levels of workers, and we tried to control for many confounding factors at the worker-employer level to isolate this relationship. So this is published in Digital Society. Just very briefly, it seems like it wasn't the case that everyone was becoming more stressed, or that everyone had reduced stress when they were more exposed to what AI could do. But some workers, the workers who often perform new and have many tasks, so multitasking workers, and those who are white-collar workers and working in manufacturing and in the public sector, but not in the service sector, they actually felt less stress than if they would be less exposed to AI. So, and this connects to my next subtopic, AI and inequality. So we wouldn't expect AI to affect everyone homogeneously, but we would expect some workers and some industries to be differentially affected, as I also talked about earlier. So these, if you remember this figure from this customer service part in the software development company, where we saw this increase in productivity, and particularly for junior workers, that's been kind of replicated in a lot of other contexts. So this is a summary from The Economist, a number of studies and the different topics that generative AI was helping out to do: coding, software development, customer chat, writing, text, etc. And in many of these cases, it seems like AI led to less inequality. So it helps the junior workers to catch up. In a few studies, one is actually has been retracted. But in some of these, at the bottom here, it seems like AI is making the best workers even better. And I would expect that there are some cases where AI can make the best ones even better, so that could actually increase inequality within companies or in pay, for instance. But just to summarize the literature, it's quite persistent pattern that the more qualified workers seem to fare better in terms of employment and wages with AI, like AI specialists or AI developers, highly qualified persons with a master's or even PhD degree, and perhaps also the low qualified. So perhaps those who are and there are some, we know too little about this yet, but maybe those who are in white-collar work that is not as advanced, and maybe you don't even need a bachelor degree to have that work, white-collar work. There is the biggest potential for automation, and there we see some patterns of this kind of polarization where the highly qualified benefit the most, and maybe also some of the low qualified. We also see there are some studies pointing to junior software developers being less. There is less demand for junior software developers, and there are some other examples also, studies by Brynjolfsson and Hosseini and Lichtinger, for instance, this year, and that has caused some worry. So how can we have senior workers in the future if we don't hire as many junior workers today? So that's a worry, and we see some evidence of that. We We haven't seen. We've tried to start to look at that for Swedish context, and we haven't seen those clear patterns here yet, at least. But also, it's not just about jobs or wages, it's also about the content of work and the skill requirements. And here there seems to be an increase with AI, an increase in demand for high, very qualified cognitive skills, and especially STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, and also for soft skills. So soft skills seems to become more and more important, and that's a long trend, but it seems to accelerate. And for some, there is one study from a PhD student of mine, Hellsten et al., where they look at not AI per se, but automation in Danish firms, and there it seems like for managers, there is a broadening of the skills required, and particularly when it comes to soft skills, whereas for blue-collar workers, it's a narrowing of the skills required. So in the long run, we're all dead. So in the long run, we see that in Sweden, the bottom half of the income distribution, their share of national income has increased. The red line has increased a lot, especially in the last 100 years. And the richest percent of in the income distribution, their share of income the blue line has decreased. So this was a very strong pattern in Sweden, so much less inequality. And this is still the case. I mean, it has not been a complete reversal. We see some tendency to more inequality in the last decades. So what will happen in the future? We can reflect on this. What we see in the US is a more persistent pattern of increase in inequality, here in terms of real weekly earnings relative to 1963. And here we see on the left-hand side for men and on the right-hand side for women. And here there is a pattern where those who have little education, at least for men, they have not seen any increase in real wages, basically, for many decades. Whereas those who have a lot of education, there is an increase in distance. So the inequality has increased a lot for men in the US, according to this figure from David Daughter, who is a professor at MIT. On the right-hand side, we see that there is a similar increase in inequality for women, but not as pronounced. So I think that we have a lot of research to do. We know quite little yet. Conceptually, AI could increase stress or decrease stress. It could help the junior workers to catch up and therefore decrease inequality, or it could automate the work of the junior workers. And this is also, as Virginia talked about, it's a choice we make about how we develop the technology and how we deploy it. How do we involve the workers? What do we want to use AI for? And if focus is on catching up with humans and trying I saw a company recently that was launched in the US. Their main idea was to remove the workers. How can we? That was their selling point. And if that's the paradigm, of course, that will affect how we develop things and how we deploy it. But conceptually, these things can go both ways. Currently, the research is mostly associations, so we need more detail and causal evidence. We need more studies in different contexts, not just for the US, and we need to look at how different AI technologies are affecting different types of workers in different places in the economy, in the geography-wise and industry-wise. And also we know that in structural transformation, it's not the case that everyone here, for instance, is affected in the same way. Maybe for some workers that are older, like me, it's more costly for us to switch jobs than for younger workers, for instance. So also the adjustment costs are not equal for everyone, and that's something that needs to be taken into account. So I'm wrapping up. So fundamentally, I think that technology, and we as economists think technology is something that has been shown is something that is good for, can be an engine for growth and welfare. And I think that's true also for AI. But the direction of the development and deployment of AI matters. It exposes workers both to potential automation and complementation. Here in the Nordic countries, I think we have an advantage compared with the US, for instance, in terms of both the relationship between employers and trade unions to adopt new technology, be positive to globalization, but help the workers to transit from one declining occupation to another, and to help through the transformation process. And that is good for also this technical or structural transformation with AI. So what I might worry a bit about is if this AI development and deployment is happening so fast that it will cause unnecessary large disruption and increased inequality, and therefore how prepared are we as workers and organizations for this technology, and also for competition from other countries or continents. So here I think we need to work with different scenarios and be ready to have policies so that we can proactively help in this transformation, so that AI can be used and we can be prosperous as workers in the presence of AI. So I've written a popular science book. I don't earn a dime on it, so but if you would like to read it, or a government report about AI and the public sector, please please have a look, or look at our lab's webpage. Thank you very much.